Hi, I'm Jenkins. I'm Audit Manager at Audit Wales, and welcome to day 4 of our COVID Learning Week, where today's theme is looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the workforce. Croeso. Today, I'm joined by Beverly Owen. Beverly is the Chief Executive of Newport Council, and today we're going to be chatting about how kindness has been key to the resilience of staff and services in helping everyone to get through the pandemic. Hello, Bev, how are you? Would you like to tell everyone listening a little bit about yourself and your role throughout the pandemic so far?
Hi, Non. Shemai, everyone.
Hi, Shemai.
So, as Non said, I'm Beverly Owen, and I'm now the Chief Executive of Newport City Council. But I wasn't just before the start of the pandemic. I was the council's former Strategic Director of Police. However, on the 23rd of March, at midway through a recruitment exercise for the permanent role of Chief Exec, I found myself becoming the leader and the acting Chief Exec for Newport City Council. So starting with obviously leading the team through the council's response to the pandemic. In July of last year, the recruitment exercise concluded. And that concluded through a virtual process, which in itself I think was quite unique. Still as intense, still as rigorous. 2 days of intense interviews with panels, partner panels, members, lots of presentations. So a very, very tough process, quite challenging, and perhaps more challenging in some ways because it was through the means of Teams. So on the 23rd of March, I found myself as the most senior officer within the organisation. And at that time, we started to work through what is our civil contingencies process to be able to enable the council's response to the pandemic and to try and make sure that we as an authority, the whole system of the authority was able to respond in a way that it needed to COVID-19. I have to say, one of the probably at an organisational level, within those first few weeks, they were probably some of the lowest and the highest points, I would say, in my career so far. Some of the lowest, clearly, given what we were about to go through and the impact on the country and the devastating effects that the pandemic has had. Really, really sad, quite an emotional time for everybody, I think. But also in terms of kindness and in terms of the way that people work together, I have to say that the way my corporate management team rallied around me, the support that they gave me, and the way that all 9 of us worked together was just incredible. And I don't think that without that sort of support, we could have got to where we needed to be as quickly as we did. What became even clearer as months went on was the kindness and the whole sort of approach that every single colleague across the whole council and the approach that they took, just the whole way that people were working, the way that people were helping each other out, supporting one another, I think was a huge factor in us being able to continue to deliver the critical services that we needed to, while still maintaining an emotional resilience as an authority. But also doing what we needed to support particularly health colleagues and wider partners, both within Newport and across Gwent, in doing whatever we could to fight this and to respond in the fight to this dreadful pandemic.
Wow. And thank you so much for giving of your time today. You're very, very kind to do that. And having spoken with you throughout the year, really, about this, it's kindness has been the key thing that's driven everything through, and people going out of their way, staff and communities voluntarily doing so, not because they're asked, not because they are paid, because they care and because they really want to help other people. So thank you very much for giving of your time. I know you're up to here at the moment with everything going on, so thank you very much. So I was just keen really to explore how you've seen and experienced people's kindness throughout the pandemic, maybe at various different levels. Maybe starting first, in terms of nationally across Wales, what help, what support you've been getting and giving between you and other partners across Wales?
What was quite heartwarming was even at the sort of acting up level, but then even more so, just after my permanent appointment, were they were informed of the informal offers that came from various parts of Wales, from other chief executives, also support from the Welsh Local Government Association, and from colleagues perhaps I've worked with previously as well, just saying that if there's anything that we can do to assist. And this was from all corners of the Principality, shall we say, from West Wales, North Wales, so lots and lots of support on offer. And again, sometimes it's just useful to have that sort of sounding board, isn't it? When you need to pause, and also to discuss some of the issues that perhaps you want to have an independent, just a slightly different view on, and maybe do not want to have to share further challenges, further pressures with colleagues across the corporate management team within the council and more widely. So yeah, I think that's at sort of the national level, and then if we talk.
Yeah, you chaired the regional Gwent recovery board too, didn't you? So and thrown in at the deep end, I suppose, in that sense, because Gwent particularly was the first hit, I suppose, in the first lockdown, and that's why I think you became therefore the lead on this. Tell us, talk us through how within Gwent.
So it's also across Gwent. As you said, what we have, in terms of civil contingencies, there's across each region a local resilience forum. And actually, I can remember sitting at the local resilience forum back mid-March 2020, when the agreement was taken among partners to stand up what is the strategic command group in response to what was starting to emerge. And as you say, Newport in particular was badly hit and was one of the ones that had the highest numbers early on in the first sort of wave. So as a result, when we moved to the sort of tailing off of the first wave of the pandemic, the next stage is to set up the recovery coordination group. So because of Newport's role within that, and having been a member of that LRF for some time, it was agreed that I would take on the chair of that role. I have to say I could not have done that. And an RCG stands up, stands down, depending on where you are within the sort of life of a pandemic or the life of a crisis. I couldn't have done that without the support of partners, particularly local authority partners, but also, Gwent Police, Health, again, the same sort of principles in terms of other chief execs colleagues across Wales, the senior officers and colleagues within those organisations equally as supportive. So something's going wrong, and not necessarily, there's just a sounding board, but also reverse checking in on me, making sure I'm okay, and I think if there are any positives in the outcome, this whole scenario, lots of people talk about building, it's a green recovery. So obviously, the whole sort of decarbonisation agenda, but I think it is this platform that's built stronger relationships. Everybody's come together, so that's the sort of, I would say, the picture across Gwent, but also South East Wales. So lots of recognition amongst partners about an awareness about the need for mutual aid, and notwithstanding this has not been the only issue we've had to deal with throughout the year. So we had really bad weather over the Christmas period, resources, everyone's tired. So again, you're relying on the strength of those relationships to take you through. And I'm in a position, and I think a number of our partner organisations are as well, that we know that if we need support and we need to do something, that I can pick a phone up to the Chief Constable, or I can pick the telephone up to somebody within Natural Resources Wales, that if we need support, it's there, and we find a route way in. So I think, nationally and regionally, that's been strong.
And you've obviously had to do this virtually, haven't you? I mean, usually relationships and getting into a new job and everything, irrespective of a crisis, kind of depends on the relationships, the face-to-face. So, you know, and that in itself. So being part of a remote or a virtual world, I suppose, and you have seen into people's lives, I suppose, in that sense too. So you've it's created some closeness in that sense, even though it's not.
It is, and I got it, you know, and I couldn't move off the sort of external partnership, support and kindness without talking about Newport partners, because yet again, you know, Newport, a very strong and close-knit community, and you know, the council's had the support of, and I'm afraid to start mentioning individual partners because I will forget someone, but you know, we work really closely with the Business Improvement District in the city centre. We've also, you know, our partners in Newport Live, our schools have been phenomenal in the support that they've shown, and the head teachers, so the leader of the council, you know, we've had check-ins with the head teachers, and we wish to continue that. That's not just part of COVID, but again, it's about building those relationships, isn't it? So yeah, so really, really good volunteering, community connector programs, which have helped us to make sure that the most vulnerable have not gone without support during this very, very difficult time. So yeah, and as you say, Non, it all comes back to kindness. What we've not been short of is people volunteering and saying, we want to help. So when you see that, it's that kind of stuff that sort of, when you hit the challenging days, when you hit the pressures, it's that keeps you going. And
that in itself, as you say, is a motivation. And how have you promoted kindness and self-kindness, I suppose, for your staff, for your members within the council? How have you worked through that in the council itself, and making sure that the people that are giving of their kindness, that they're feeling the value of that?
Yeah, and there are, you know, there's numerous examples within the authority where people have just gone over and above. Then, you know, they've moved into different roles really quickly without nothing more than an ask. We've had staff sleeping over in children's homes. We've had, you know, the stories that we've sort of had fed back to us about care homes and the way that colleagues have facilitated contact, you know, Non, with families. Housing teams been flat out over the whole sort of year because their workloads have increased due to change duties. You know, the refuge teams have keep going. We had one colleague within our neighbourhood information hub, so our kind of data centre, if you like, around information, who just worked round the clock because we were heavily involved, and he led a piece of work around shielding and food parcels. And I know on one shift, you know, one kind of straight through, he must have worked about 20, 22 hours just because he wanted to get it done to make sure that people were not. So we've seen examples like that. But then obviously what we've had to do, as you said, as a council, is make sure that self-care is part of the wider kindness picture. So, you know, it's absolutely amazing that people have been as kind, as resilient, empathetic, and just so hardworking, but they need to look at, you know, so what we tried to do is make sure that through you know, video messaging, staff messaging, try to say to, okay, you know, you've got to look after yourself as well, make sure you get in fresh air, make sure you're eating properly, you're getting enough rest, you know, we really want you to do this and to help us, but unless you look after yourselves and you're kind to yourself and take some time out, then we'll, you know, we could be in a more challenging situation than if huge numbers of colleagues fall over. Plus, there's also, as I mentioned earlier, the sort of emotional resilience organisationally, but it's also about individuals, and people have lost loved ones or have had people critically ill. So the council has a very sort of solid support structure anyway, in terms of, you know, we've got referral mechanisms, and we've got information people, you know, they can self-refer privately. So there's that's available to members as well. So we've made sure that, you know, there's a good structure. We've tried to reinforce that with people. We've also tried to make sure that, you know, people have regular check-ins and conversations. So because teams just, you know, in a formal way it's tiring. It's a different way of working and living. And we've tried to say to people as well, make carve time out of your day to get some me time, but also try and catch up with other people for more of a social conversation rather than the formality of it. So it's been really, really challenging for everybody. We've tried to make sure that as an organisation, people do feel supported. Yes, there's been a lot. It's a mixed bag, but there's been a lot of stuff that we've tried to do to make sure that people are supported, and just to say to people, talk, ask for help, speak to a colleague. If you can't speak to your manager, speak to a colleague, just to try and ensure people are supported.
Oh, and also you mentioned to me previously something that you did around Christmas in terms of staff awards or staff thank yous.
Yeah,
talk us through a little bit about that. Yeah,
that's correct. So every year we do an annual staff awards, but this year we linked them to the COVID effort. And there was lots, going the extra mile, ranging from innovation, within COVID, different practices. And yes, within that, there were lots of awards given out. So I mentioned earlier that we've had staff sleeping in children's homes. And I mentioned the one story that came in from one of our care homes about maintaining contact with family, and somebody acting as that enabler to make that happen. One of our special educational needs schools, some absolutely heart-rendering stories of the weekly contacts that staff have made sure that they've maintained those contacts. From a sort of community's perspective, again, staff just changing roles, just at the ask of us, as the senior team saying, okay, we need this many people to do this role. People have just generally come forward. So if we think in resilience terms, people have switched from perhaps delivering skills programs into delivering food parcels for a period of time. Weekly contacts with Welsh Government to make sure that, to get the food parcels delivered. So that whole logistical effort in itself is quite, is quite a drain on resources. The Civil Contingencies team, so they actually had one of the awards. They've not stopped, and they're only a little team, and they've not stopped throughout because the pandemic doesn't stop at 5 o'clock on a Friday. The issues don't stop at 5 o'clock on Friday. So there's always a constant kind of, an eye from somebody on what's happening. Test and trace and the whole sort of infection control teams, they have been really just flat out. So to try and at least, sort of manage some of the day jobs around environmental health whilst having to respond to the additional workload that they've had to has just been phenomenal, and they've done it, and they again worked around the clock. And when I look at the second wave and was hearing some of the numbers that were emerging, and again the way that the test and trace team locally and across Gwent, the way those numbers were turned around, and they've managed to chip away at them to get back to it's remarkable, really remarkable.
And lots, I suppose, to learn from and to continue with. It gives you a boost, doesn't it, in terms of that people are so kind and want to do this, and something that we can take forward to the future in public services, hopefully. But one of the key things that in all of this, how have you been kind to yourself?
Once I got past July, I think things did become a little bit easier, because that was certainly a challenging few months, knowing that was sort of still having to take place, not knowing what the outcome would be, because none of us knew what the outcome of July's recruitment conclusion would have been. So yeah, it was tough, but I think the first 3 months I think everybody was a bit more resilient right at the beginning, weren't they?
And the adrenaline was pumping too, and it was a crisis, and
carries you through, and so it was just, I think, it's a cliche, isn't it? Keep calm and carry on. But we had to. There was no alternative. It was right. The council needs leadership. The city needs the council, and as do partners to help them, and vice versa. So the first sort of 3 months, being honest, it was probably just like an adrenaline treadmill. You just keep going. And then obviously things started with the pandemic to calm a little bit in the summer, went through the recruitment process. And I think during the summer, it was about spending lots of time outside, making sure plenty of fresh air at every opportunity, because I'm a big outdoors person anyway. So, you know, if I can get out in the fresh air, I'll be out. So lots of walking. I think it's been harder, and I think everybody I have spoken to has said that the sort of second wave and the second lockdown has been more difficult because of the dark nights, dark mornings. But I think it is just about making sure you create that space at some point, even if you can't achieve that every single day. And I was thinking this last night, I thought, I haven't been out the house since Monday. And that's not normal. That really isn't normal, because, you know, every day you try and you've got to have at least some sort of form of I've been exercising, but not kind of out walking. So for me, it's been about fresh air, getting outdoors as much as possible, taking up a new exercise regime.
I've heard about the personal training, yes.
so that's been quite interesting, but it's good and hugely important, I think, to mental health and well-being that everybody engages in some form of activity. And just, I suppose, just time for relaxation, just time reading, making sure I spend time with the family. I've got a son, a 17-year-old, who did his GCSEs last year. So that was also an interesting introduction to the pandemic, when I had what was then a 16-year-old panicking what was going to happen with his exams. So yeah, just you know, nothing overly exciting on, but just time, just taking some time out, some space, exercise, fresh air, and just trying to switch off at some point, particularly, you know, certain days on the weekend. Just like, okay, that's one day where you're sort of gonna, never always happens. I think as a chief exec, that can be quite difficult, and that's understandable, but it's at least having some space to empty your head, even if it's just for a few hours.
True. And whatever, you know, everybody has their own kind of way out of that, I suppose. Mine's music or reading, even poems. I've come up with various limericks for various things, but whatever works, isn't it? But it is about setting and boundaries too, as being kind to yourself, I find, you know, and it is like, okay, shut the laptop down, put it in the bag, and then kind of move to a different room, which kind of is zoning. So that helps. You know, it's been in itself, I mean, we're living through history, I suppose, in this, you know, this, we won't know of this, hopefully, again, because we haven't known of it in the past. And that's not to say that it hasn't happened in the past, but it isn't within our lifetime. But drawing from this, one of the things that I think is key and important for public services is to learn from this, and that future generations, because they have felt this too, you know, that the younger ones amongst us in primary school and secondary school will have felt this big time. So what advice would you give future generations about why it's so important to live and lead with kindness in the past, so that if and when we might go through a crisis again, that they remember that this is the way to deal with things?
My leadership has generally always been based on, you know, a good, what I consider to be, you know, moral values and kindness. So for me personally, always is challenging to sort of change the way I do things, because the way that I've led, the way I've worked with colleagues throughout the last year would be no different to how I'd normally work. But I think for future generations, always remember that whoever you're working with, working for, or who's working for you, they're somebody else's other. So it's that person is somebody's daughter, brother, sister, his father, you know, whatever, is somebody else's other, and they're a person. And very often, if you treat somebody with kindness, and I certainly try and instill this in my son, if you treat somebody with kindness, it's very likely you're going to get that back. And even if you don't get it back, or maybe just step back a little bit, reflect, allow them to reflect, because they may be having a really bad day or a really bad time of it. So ask, be open-minded, listen. Listening for me is huge, and I think as this has gone on and we're more and more on Teams and we're all more and more tired, we have to bring that listening point back, because I think everybody's at the point where they're finding listening quite difficult as well. So I think for me, that would, if I was to give a message to future generations, and as I said, this is what I try to instill, is remember that everybody else is a person. Remember they could be having a bad day, good day, and if you treat them with kindness and support, chances are you'll get a better outcome and you'll get a better response as well.
Oh, well, thank you so much for your time today, Bev. And as always, lovely chatting with you, and we'll keep on chatting in the future. But for now, take some time out. The sun is shining today, probably one of the first days that it's been shining. So try and make the most of it, and be kind to yourself too. And thank you very much to you and everybody for giving of your time. So thank you very much.
No problem. Diolch yn fawr. Hwyl fawr.